Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori and Novia. Guys, this is one of my absolute favorite videos to make every year, and I am so excited that we are finally at the end of November, and it is time to tell you 25 books that I want to read in the year 2025. Now, last year I made a video called 24 Books I Want to Read in 2024, and I ended up reading 11 out of those 24 books throughout the year of 2024. Like, I don't know who thought it was a good idea to read War and Peace in 2024. There's a lot of reasons for the books I didn't end up reading, but I did get through 11 of my 24 goal books for 2024, and I'm hoping to do even better going into 2025. One of the ways I'm going to help myself out this year is by making a note on my phone that has check boxes for each of the books I mentioned in this video so that I can keep a little bit easier track instead of having to go back and watch the video every time I want to remember which books I said I wanted to read. I'm really excited about all of these books. Some of them have been on my TBR for a long time. Some of them are continuations of books that I read here in 2024. And 25 books is about a third or less of the total books that I usually read in a year. So giving myself 25 goal books still gives me a huge open space to do mood reading and to, pick up something new if I want to. So I don't feel stressed out by picking and making a list of 25 books for the next year, because I feel like that is incredibly manageable. Now, it was easier for me to start out the video down here on the floor with all the stacks of books, but I'm not gonna lie, I think we're gonna switch back up to the table for the rest of the video, because otherwise my back is going to die. I'm such an old lady, you guys. I can hear all of you in the comments who are older than me going, "You're not even that old." So what I did last year was I kind of separated out the books that I was going to read by genre. What I decided I'm going to do this year is non-fantasy and fantasy and sci-fi. So let's start with the non-fantasy, because one of the things that I really dropped the ball on here in 2024 was all of my non-fantasy reads that I had on my goal list for this last year. And that's something I really want to remedy in 2025, because I love fantasy. That will always be my primary genre. But I really missed reading the classics, the historical fiction, the nonfiction, all of that kind of stuff this last year. I didn't get as much of that in as I would have liked to. So this next year, I'm really excited because I have a really good stack of non-fantasy books to share with you guys today. The first one is an author that has been on my TBR forever, and that is Agatha Christie. I really want to read my first Agatha Christie mystery this next year. I have And Then There Were None, which is the one that kind of has been pulling me in the most out of the ones that I have. I do have a couple of other ones like Murder on the Orient Express, but I have seen the film of that one, so I wanted to go into Agatha Christie and read one of her more popular books that I really don't know anything about. And Then There Were None, I think, is going to be that book. And these are so short, you guys, so I think it's going to be a super easy read. It's going to be really fun, and I've been kind of in the mood for a little bit of murder mystery recently, and I'm excited to try Agatha Christie for the first time. Next up is a stack of books that was on my stack of books from last year when I was picking out 2024 books, and that is a stack of translated fiction from Korea and Japan. And I did actually end up reading one of these from the stack from last year, and it was a really good book and I really enjoyed it. I read it with my friend John Morrow over at Grimdark Magazine, and we had a really good time discussing that book. And as you can see, I have a good stack here of books that I'm really excited to get to. I think if I had to pick one or two that I'm going to prioritize this year is I'd like to read How Do You Live by Yoshino. This is a book that is Hayao Miyazaki from Studio Ghibli's favorite book of all time, and that by itself makes me want to read it. And then also If Cats Disappeared from the World by Genki Kawamura. Those are kind of the two priority books, but as you can see, I've got a lot of really great options here, and I have really missed reading some translated fiction. So that's one of my goals in 2025. Next up is an author that I have had several friends fall absolutely in love with this year, and it makes me feel the FOMO like crazy because he's been on my shelf, on my TBR for ages, and that is Kazuo Ishiguro. And I have his Never Let Me Go book, and I am really excited to check this out. I have started this book before. As you can see, I even still have the bookmark a little ways in, but I am going to start it over and try to get through that here in 2025 to see what Ishiguro's writing is like, because I've had so many friends that really fell in love with his writing this year that I have to check it out, and it's really bumped him up to the top of my TBR. Next up is a book that I hauled this year that is the original story that was made into a movie, a black and white movie, I think, that I saw when I was a kid, and I had completely forgotten that this story even existed until this year when I ran across the book. And that is How Green Was My Valley by Richard Llewellyn. This is the story of a coal mining community in South Wales, and the young man who is the protagonist of the story goes through a lot of heavy stuff in his coming of age kind of transition. And I really want to read the book because I remember loving the film and it leaving a really big impact on me, and I think it's going to be a book that sticks with me for a long time, so I'm really excited to read this and see how the book compares to the movie, and I may even rewatch the movie after I'm done with the book. Next up on my list of books that I want to read is Midnight in Broad Daylight, a Japanese-American family caught between two worlds by Pamela Rotner Sakamoto. This is the story of a family who, during the beginning of World War II, some of their family was still in Japan and some of their family was in America around the time of Pearl Harbor. And I think getting kind of both sides of the same family's viewpoint on everything that happened during that time and how it affected their family and how those relationships were changed through that experience would be really sobering and really fascinating. What really drew me to this one specifically was the idea of the family being on essentially two sides of the war and how that would affect them, and I just think it's going to be a really good read. Next up is a project that I have been really excited for a while, and I did mention some of these on my 2024 list, but I didn't have all of the books. So now I officially have S.E. Hinton's entire stack of books. She is the author of The Outsiders, which I read last year, and I absolutely loved that book, you guys. It's one of my favorite stories of all time. It's in my top 10 books of all time list. And I have been wanting for a while to read the rest of S.E. Hinton's work. I have already read That Was Then, This Is Now, which is why it's not on this list. But I intend to read all of her books in the coming year and make some kind of a video just talking about all of the books and maybe not ranking them necessarily, but kind of a where to start with S.E. Hinton, because she is one of my favorite authors and I think she is absolutely brilliant, and I cannot wait to see what other stories she has up her sleeve. Also last year, I read a book called Augustus by John Williams. It's one of the best historical fiction books I have ever read, and it made me want to continue reading John Williams' work. And a booktube darling in my sphere this last year or two has been Stoner by John Williams. I have so many friends who absolutely loved this book. I'm very excited to check this out and see how it differs from Augustus, because the subject matter is incredibly different. But I've heard that this is just a really, really solid book. It's the story of a professor, and it's pretty much, it's not meant to be an action-packed book. It's just kind of an internal view of this character and the life that he lives, and I'm here for it. I'm really excited to see what John Williams is going to do with a completely different subject matter. And yeah, Stoner is definitely on the list for this next year. Next up is a nonfiction read that I have been very excited to get to, and that is Achilles in Vietnam by Jonathan Shea, Combat Trauma and the Undoing of Character. So it's not a secret on the channel that I am a massive fan of military fiction and military fantasy. I grew up in a family where military history was a huge part of just the canon of information I was given as I was growing up, with a grandfather who was a Civil War historian, and my grandparents did a lot of history work. It's just always been something that has been really coded into my DNA. And this book has gotten so many accolades dissecting what happens within combat and how that affects the soldiers who are involved in war and in conflict. And I think that this is going to be an absolutely incredible read, not just from a reading and learning standpoint, but also from a writing standpoint, because I do write military fantasy as well. And so I think this book is going to be really valuable for me as a writer. Next up is The Court Dancer by Kyung-Suk Shin. This is a story of a young courtesan from much older era Korea and her travels and how she was an orphan and came under the affections of the Chinese, I'm assuming, empress at the time. And I don't know, I read a couple pages of this when I first got it, and the writing style really hooked me. And I'm really excited to get to this. I, as you guys know, am a huge fan of Asian history and any kind of fiction from Japan and Korea and China, and so I'm very excited to give this a read. I've heard amazing things about it, and I can't wait to tell you guys what I think, because this has been one that's just kind of been glaring at me from the shelf for quite a while, because I'm really excited to read it. Next up is a couple of books from one of my favorite historical fiction writers, and that is Lisa See. If you haven't already read Snowflower and the Secret Fan or The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, I absolutely love both of those books by her and just could not wait to get my hands on more. Her latest is Lady Tan's Circle of Women. This is a story of a young woman who is interested in medicine and kind of in the aristocracy of, I believe, Chinese government, question mark. And then The Island of Sea Women I'll be reading in January, and this is the story of the female divers on Jeju Island in Korea, both of which I just cannot wait to devour, because Lisa See's writing is so powerful and she's such a good character writer. The way that she seamlessly integrates historical fiction with these incredibly powerful and profound character relationships is just so good. It's so good, you guys. If you are interested at all in this type of historical fiction, please pick up Lisa See, because she is phenomenal. Last but not least on the non-fantasy list, I have The Gates of the Alamo by Stephen Harrigan. This is a book that I had picked up at a small bookstore near us a while ago, and the owner of the store had told me that it is one of his favorite historical fiction books. I can't wait to read this. The Alamo is such a fascinating time of history, and it's such a fascinating, like, military event that I was really excited to find a book that was highly recommended by somebody else who liked historical fiction, and I think it's going to be really cool, especially since I've had the opportunity to visit the Alamo and I've gotten to see it, and it really strikes you when you see how small it actually is, and realizing that such a incredibly brutal conflict took place in this very small space was just kind of surreal when we went to visit. So I'm really looking forward to this, and it's kind of an era of history that I really haven't done that much reading on, so I'm looking forward to it. If it looks like I already showed you more than 25 books, don't panic. I kind of fudged the rules a little bit by including multiple books by the same author and or like my translated pile of fiction, because I just want to get through a bunch of those. So those are my non-fantasy goal reads for the year 2025. Now let's dig in to fantasy and sci-fi. Now again, multiple books per author. The City Watch by Terry Pratchett. This is a series that I will be finishing in 2025, and I can't wait. For those of you that have been watching my channel for a while this year, you will know that Terry Pratchett is now becoming one of my all-time favorite authors after having read four and a half of his Discworld books, and I could not be more excited to keep going. I love, love, love his writing style. I love his humor. I love how he weaves deeper themes into that humor so effortlessly. It's so good. His characters are so good, and I have been absolutely having a ball with the City Watch books. I believe I have 4 or 5 of them left. but I'll easily be able to get through those in the year 2025. Another continuation that I have on my fantasy list is the Raven's Shadow series by Anthony Ryan. I read Bloodsong this year in 2025 and loved it. And I've heard mixed reviews of the rest of the trilogy, but I honestly am just excited to get in there and figure out what I think of it. Tower Lord is book 2 in the Raven's Shadow trilogy, and the story does continue in another trilogy after that, but I'm just excited to finish another trilogy and see where Anthony Ryan is going to go with these other characters. I believe there's some POV shifts and things, but that's definitely high up on my finish list for 2025. Next up is the beginning of quite a long series, but it has been just magnetizing me from this shelf all year, and I can't stand it anymore. I want to start The Expanse in 2025. I want to read at least a couple books from the series. Leviathan Wakes is book 1. I have not seen the TV series. I know very, very little about this book series at all, other than the fact that it is hard sci-fi and there's a motley crew. So yeah, that's all I needed to know. I'm sold. I'm very excited to get to this. They are kind of chonky, but I have a feeling that they won't be too dense to get through. That's my hope, at least. But I'm very excited to read some more sci-fi in 2025, and I think Leviathan Wakes is going to be a great place to start. Next up is a book by my friend Shauna Lawless, The Children of Gods and Fighting Men. Can we just talk about this cover real quick? Because this might be one of my favorite typography style covers ever. It's so good. Look at the spine. It's a beautiful book. This is a historical fantasy set in Ireland, and the main characters are women. And I know that Shauna has put so much dedication and love into this series, and I've heard it's really intense, I've heard it's really good, and she just recently finished the final book. So I am super excited to get to this. I cannot wait to read, and speaking of Anthony Ryan, who I literally just held up, he has a blurb on the back. So yeah, I can't wait to read this. I think that it's going to be something a little bit different. I'm definitely looking forward to some Celtic-inspired fantasy, and we'll see what Shauna has in store. We're going to go to a different area of the globe after that with Sons of Darkness by Gaurav Mohanty. This is essentially Game of Thrones meets the Mahabharata, from what I understand, and I have no idea what that's gonna mean in this story, but I do know that it's gonna be really, really intense, and I've heard a lot of great things about this book. It is, again, these covers, you guys, like, what an absolutely stunning cover. I can't wait for this. I think it's gonna be super grimdark, very brutal, very houses tearing each other apart kind of story, and I am looking forward to seeing what kind of a crazy world Gaurav Mohanty created in Sons of Darkness. Back over to the sci-fi realm, I'm going to read In the Orbit of Sirens by my friend T.A. Bruno. I read Down Below Beyond last year, I believe, and I absolutely loved it. I think it's a brilliant standalone sci-fantasy vibe story. His original trilogy that he wrote before that begins with In the Orbit of Sirens. I'm really excited to see what this looks like. I think it's going to have a bit more of a sci-fantasy feel as well, and hard sci-fi is, I'm not quite ready for that yet. You know, Leviathan Wakes is going to be kind of my first foray into that a little bit, but I'm taking it slow because hard sci-fi, I don't know how I'm going to feel about it. So I'm really excited to get into some more sci-fantasy. I know that T.A. Bruno has some really brilliant alien races in this story and that he writes them really well. So I'm super excited to get to that and see what this book is about and to start a sci-fantasy trilogy next year. This next one is going to make a lot of people happy, especially with my experience with a previous trilogy of this author earlier this year. And that is the Tawny Man trilogy, which is the third trilogy in the realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. I read Ship of Magic this year, and for those of you that don't know, here is my official video review of it. I had a horrible time with Ship of Magic, and really am not sure if I'm going to continue the trilogy. I did not like the experience I had with Ship of Magic at all. And I think that with the advice and very helpful therapy sessions that I've had with some of my Rob and Hob friends, we are going to be moving on to the Tawny Man trilogy and going back to Fitz and the Fool here in 2025, which I'm honestly really excited about. Despite the time that I had with Ship of Magic, I'm really excited to get back with Fitz and the Fool. I think that Rob and Hob is a really good writer. I think I just really missed the mark with Live Ship Traders, and I'm excited to get back to Tawny Man. Next up, I have A Quiet Vengeance by Tim Hardy. This is a book that I've had sitting on my shelf for quite a while, and it is kind of a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy with, I think, 3 POVs. I read the first couple of chapters and really enjoyed it a while ago. I don't know if my bookmark is still in there. This story starts out with a young woman who is kind of caught up in this street gang in this Middle Eastern inspired fantasy world, and just kind of expands from there. And I've heard so many good things about Tim Hardy's writing and some of his other series that I'm really looking forward to checking this one out, and it's been on my TBR long enough that it is definitely time for me to read it in 2025. All right, you guys, this one is going to make a lot of people very, very happy. I'm going to be reading Empire of Silence in 2025. Once I finish Lightbringer by Pierce Brown, I wanted to kind of get the Red Rising series out of the way and have that under my belt before I went into another series, big series like that. And it's time, because I will be finishing Lightbringer in the next couple of weeks, and Empire of Silence is on deck, so I'm very excited to get this started, probably in the first half of 2025. I don't know how far into the series I'm going to get, but I am committed to at least reading through book 2. I'm trying to go into it as blind as I can, which is a little tricky because so many people want me to read this series that I have heard a lot about it, which is okay. I'm still looking forward to it, and I've been convinced to give myself at least through book 2 to really settle into the series before I decide how I feel about it. But I'm excited. Let's go big, massive sci-fantasy worlds. I'm here for it. I'm very excited to get to this next year, finally. Next up is The Legend of Eli Monpress by Rachel Aaron. This is an omnibus edition of the first 3 books, which I'll probably end up getting through the entire omnibus. This is a book that was recommended to me by my friend Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads, and it's gonna have, I think, a very slight Lies of Locke Lamora flavor, where we have a mischievous main character who is on the wrong side of the law. He's wanted for thievery and a host of other things. And he's like, I'm guessing he's the kind of character that he's going to be good despite himself, which I always love. That's always fun. And this is a story I really haven't heard that much about on BookTube, so I'm really looking forward to checking it out and having a good time. I mean, look, like, this guy looks like he's about to get into some serious trouble, and I'm excited to read about it. Next up is another omnibus edition, and that is The Deed of Paxenarian by Elizabeth Moon. This is a trilogy of books that goes back into the classic vaults a little bit, but this book has been really intriguing me for quite a while because it's got, from what I hear, really solid classic fantasy with a good military understanding from the author. There's gonna be a good kind of coming of age bent to the story, especially in the beginning. And I don't know that much about it, but when I've heard people talk about this series, they talk about it very reverently, which makes me excited to read about it. And of course, this book fits into the reads that I've been doing the last couple of years, searching out and appreciating stories written by women in sci-fi and fantasy in the classics all the way up to now, and I've heard a lot of good things about Elizabeth Moon's work. Next up is a duology, so I'm counting them as one. I had a fantastic time with Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier this last year, and I picked up a duology of hers called Wolfskin and Fox Mask, which, from what I understand, is the story of the Viking berserkers in a fantasy world when they're not raiding and pillaging, which I thought was a really interesting premise, and I've heard that this is going to be a good fit for me as a reader, and I just can't wait to read these. I cannot wait to get back to Juliette Marillier's work. I think that this duology is going to be super easy to get through in 2025, and I honestly could not be more excited to read more of her work. Alright guys, here's another book that I honestly cannot believe that I have not read yet. That is Flames of Mira by Clay Harmon. This is a very break the chains style fantasy story, and it's been out for quite a while, and I bought it pretty much when it first came out. And I still have not read it. I don't know why, but I have heard that this is going to be a really good flavor story for Red Rising fans, which is one of the reasons why I picked it up right away. And I don't know. I'm really excited for some really intense break the chain style storytelling. So I think this is going to fit in really well with some of the other reads that I have this year and give me a little bit of a palette cleanser that I think is going to check a lot of boxes for me. Last but certainly not least is going back to another classic fantasy author, and that is Lois McMaster Bujold with The Curse of Shalion. I've heard so many good things about this book, and I feel like a broken record at this point, honestly, but this book has been incessantly recommended to me by certain people in my friend group, you know who you are, and I think with really good cause, because this is an older female protagonist, and I think that from what I've heard, the story has a lot of really powerful world building and relationship building. So I'm really excited to read that because all of that sounds really awesome to me, and I have been told by interested parties that I'm really, really gonna love this book. So who am I to argue? Okay guys, we got through all of those books and now I have to put them all back on my shelves, which is just, I mean, honestly, it's giving me some good practice for another video I'm going to be doing in the next couple of weeks where I'm going to be taking even more books off my shelves. But I would love to know down in the comments below, let me know what books you are most excited to read in 2025, because I am so excited whenever we get to this point in the year. Moving into the next year always feels a little bit like a fresh start, like you're turning into a new chapter. And I love that feeling, and it makes me really excited and giddy to look through my bookshelves and figure out, what is my mood this year? What am I feeling this year? What am I most excited to read once we turn the corner into 2025? So this was a really fun video to pull all these books out for, and I would love to know, like I said, your picks for 2025 down in the comments below. Which of these books do you think I'm going to enjoy the most? Which ones are you most excited to talk about? I can't wait. There's going to be some amazing reads in 2025. We've had some amazing reads here in 2024, and I'm just excited to get through more pages next year. So I hope you are having a fantastic week. I hope you're reading some 5-star reads, and I'll see you in the next video.